Children's Church.
Well, it is good to be back. I'm glad Dr. Lewis had a good message I heard and challenged you guys, so that's awesome. It's always funny. I remember when I first got into Southern Baptist life, I think I told you I wasn't raised Southern Baptist. My wife switched me. But anyway, there used to be the old Home Mission Board, right? It's now Lifeway. I mean, not Lifeway. It's now the North American Mission Board. But the old Home Mission Board is what Dr. Lewis actually was. He was the executive director of that. And so I'm always kind of interested that, hey, it was right down the street. So that's kind of cool because, that was a huge responsibility he had, and we're thankful for his service there. But anyway, it's good to be back. It seems like I haven't been here for a while because fall is just really, especially at the start of school, there's just lots going on. I appreciate people filling in on Wednesday night, but I missed that. And then, of course, decided to do this retreat up in Montana. We had about 45 college students from Montana Tech at the retreat, so that was a good time, and got to share with them. Just wanted to challenge them to live out their Christian life, and right there. One of the things that's interesting, if you've ever lived in what we call more of an emerging region or a pioneering region, we lived in Washington State for several years. It's really interesting because there aren't any what I would call casual. There's not as many as casual Christians. There's still some, but there's not as many because there's no real reason to there's no real reason to go to church unless it really means something to you. It doesn't help you. Like it used to be in the South, I think it's changing, but it used to be in the South if you're a member of whatever church, that helped you. That helped you in the community. People looked up to that, But I don't think it's really that true anymore anyway. But certainly when we were in Washington, one of the refreshing parts of that was people came to church because they really wanted to. There was no social pressure to go to church. And so that's kind of exciting. I think that's one thing that also drew me to college students. Because again, in the college environment, you have to get up on your own. You have to go to church. You have to decide to commit to growing in your faith because there's nothing in the college environment that says you ought to be doing this. There's no one saying that except college ministers, of course. And so that's an exciting part of that. So thanks for letting me get out there. We had a fun road trip out there. It was about 21 hours out there and 21 hours back. I don't know. I thought it would be shorter on the way back, but it wasn't. So anyway, but it was fun, and we had a good time. I got to take my wife Vicki and my ministry assistant Tamara Perry, who works with me, and so we all just jumped in the car, and I was thankful Tamara's quite a bit younger than me because she drove from like 1 in the morning till 5 in the morning on the way home because we wanted to get home. And so anyway, I love that youngness because I couldn't have done that. I had to pull over and sleep. So anyway, which is better than sleeping behind the wheel, which unfortunately a couple of times I'm glad they have rumble strips now. We'll just leave it at that. But anyway, one of the things I always notice when I drive up here is obviously, like a lot of churches, y'all have a graveyard right next to you. And I saw this quote, and I think it's really interesting. The graveyard is the richest place on earth, because it is here that you will find all the hopes and dreams that were never fulfilled, the books that were never written, the songs that were never sung, the inventions that were never shared, the cures that were never discovered, all because someone was too afraid to take that first step or to keep with the problem. Or to be determined to carry out the dream. That's a quote by Les Brown. I've heard it in other ways as well. And I think it's an interesting quote because I think there are a lot. And as I get closer to that time, I'm beginning to think about that more. I had something happen the other day. Maybe it's happened to you. My mom says, scolds people when they do it, but I had somebody ask me if I wanted a senior discount. Okay? My mom always says, if people want that, they'll tell you. You probably shouldn't ask. So I thought that was funny. And then it's been almost a year now. We were actually in Columbia at a restaurant, and it was so funny because I'm standing up, and this young lady is sitting down on one of the stools next to her, and she gets up and says, "Would you like my stool?" I'm like, man, I am getting old. So I teased her a little bit, and then she, of course, was embarrassed, and so I'm getting closer to the graveyard than I was years ago, and so this it means something because I think it has a lot of truth to it. What keeps us from actually doing the things that God has put on our hearts? What keeps us from engaging the books or the songs or the inventions or just being with people the way we need to, and influencing them so that they might have? All the great evangelists actually had Sunday school teachers. Most of them did. I remember at a conference where two of the biggest names in Christian work right now were sitting there, and they were talking about their third grade. They were in the same class in third grade in Sunday school, and they talked about the lady that had influenced them. Nobody had ever heard of that lady. Everybody's heard of these two, but nobody had ever heard of her. But yet she was influential in making that happen. It's not about how big you do it, it's just, are you faithful in doing it? And so today we're going to talk about, in the next couple of weeks, Joseph, because I think Joseph is an absolutely remarkable story. It's a remarkable story in a number of ways, but I'm going to try to help us really dig in, and not so much, it's easy. You've read the story, you know the story, if you've been around church very long, and it's easy to jump to the end, and I'm asking you, try not to do that. Try to experience the story in each moment, because I think it'll have a lot more power for you. Because if we jump to the end, it's like, watching a football game where you already know the score. It's like, okay, yeah, well, it doesn't really matter what happens. We win in the end or we lose in the end, whatever it is. And so try to really engage this, because I think it's so important. And what I think that we see in Joseph is this process of him becoming a servant leader. He's journeying to become a servant leader. And he's journeying to do something that God needs him to do. Now, again, we can get caught up and say, oh, well, yeah, of course they didn't do him. He doesn't know any of that. See, that's what we sometimes forget. Joseph and all these biblical characters, Abraham, all of them, yeah, they knew God taught them, all that kind of stuff, but they didn't understand what God would. We have the whole picture now. They didn't have the whole picture. Joseph didn't know anything that was going on. Joseph just knew he was 17 years old, and he was kind of mouthy, as we'll find out today. And then as the story progresses, he does some things, and some things happen to him, and all that kind of stuff. But he doesn't know he's part of this grand plan of God. He doesn't know that. He's just trying to survive. And so I really caution you to kind of just allow the story to speak at every moment instead of jumping to the end, go, oh yeah, that's what happened. It's really cool. It's hard though, I'll be honest. But it's this idea of brokenness. Now, I talked to John last night, and I don't know if you know this, but they're actually going, have you ever heard of 365 miles of garage sales? Up in Nebraska, they had like 365 miles. He was telling me this last night on the phone. I'm like, he goes, don't worry, we're not doing all of them. I go, well, that's good. That's a long ways. But I just thought that was really humorous. But of course he does horses, and some of you probably in here do horses as well. And so when you can correct all the stuff I'm about to say because it's probably wrong. But I had a horse when I was young, mostly because Vicki had a horse, my wife, and I wanted to, impress her. I don't think I did very well, but because my horse was a little ornery, and I didn't know what to do, and so. But I never forget, we went up to they had this little rodeo-y thing. It wasn't really a rodeo, but a neighbor of hers had this really good horse at barrel racing, right? Now, I'd been barrel racing with my horse, but it wasn't one of those hang on as they run it because the horse knows more than you do. It was more like I had to do everything, kind of steer, all that, And so anyway, needless to say, she won big time. And I always called her a cheater because she used somebody else's horse. But But that horse was trained and broken to race barrels. And basically all he had to do is hang on. That's all you really had to do. My horse, on the other hand, wasn't. But just think about that, the idea of brokenness, because without brokenness in the horse's life, they're not useful. I mean, they look really cool running across the plains out there in Montana, but they're no use. I mean, there's no real use for them if they're running out there, if they haven't humbled themselves to be broken and become useful. Whether it's to a saddle or whether it's to, some other, to do a trailer or whatever, they're not useful unless they're broken. And in the same way, I think that's true of us. We can kind of be the wild horse, if you will, if we don't allow God and we don't choose to humble ourselves and allow God to be in control instead of us. That's really what it's about. It's a trust relationship that we decide that God's way is better than ours. And so that's what we're going to see as we walk through Joseph. So if you want to turn to chapter 37 of Genesis, we're going to read that and have some comments on it. Now, Joseph was one of the sons of Jacob, and Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob. So he was one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And so starting in verse 1, it says, Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan, and these are the family records of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers, and the young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age. And he made a robe of many colors for him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. Then Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. There we are, binding sheaves of grain in the field, and suddenly my sheaves stood up, and your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Are you really going to reign over us? His brothers asked him. Are you really going to rule over us? So they hated him even more because of his dream and what he had said. And then he had another dream and told it to his brothers. He doesn't learn very well. Look, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And he told his father and the brothers, but his father rebuked him. What kind of dream is it that you had? He said, are your mother and I going to come and bow down to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept this matter in mind. And we're going to stop there for right now because really we're seeing the setup of what's going to happen through this journey. And so first of all, we see Joseph, and we don't get any details in this, so we just have to assume they must not be important. But the very first thing he does is he's kind of a 17-year-old tattletale, right? I don't know what the brothers were doing. They obviously weren't doing what he thought they ought to be doing, so he's the one that tells. Now, I don't know about you. I had a younger brother, and I think that's their job, is to tell, right? Anybody else have a younger brother or younger sister? I mean, that's their whole job. It's just tell. I mean, that's what they do. Their whole life is that they just snitch, right? Okay? Or mine did anyway. And most of the time it was right. They were right. So what could I say? I was wrong. They caught me. I got snitched out, and there I was. But it does get kind of annoying at the very least. But that starts this process. And isn't it interesting? I don't know about you, but if you look back on a lot of issues, they kind of start rather just in small ways. I mean, he snitched on his brothers. Do you think this was the first time he snitched on his brothers? No, I don't think so. It just happens to be this time it kind of caught hold because of what else happened. So that's the first thing. So the setup is, first of all, he sets himself up kind of by being a snitch. The second thing is his dad kind of sets him up. Now, I don't know about you, but I remember very clearly, and I remember several times as pastor, people coming out with Joseph, and they colored the little robe and all different colors, He didn't follow Parenting 101. You don't pick out one kid and go, okay, I'm going to give you extra stuff because I just like you better, right? That's not a great way to build relationships amongst your brothers. It's just not. And so Jacob doesn't help him out any here. And I understand why. I understand if you read the previous part of the story, he does have Joseph when he's really older, and it wasn't really, kind of a surprise, all that kind of stuff. But even then, you got to have a little more discernment and wisdom. So not only does Joseph set himself up, but his dad kind of sets him up. Because when you do things like that, it just frustrates the other people. Now, that doesn't mean you can't parent all your kids differently, but to really obviously make it known that you like this one better, it's just not a good thing to do, is it? I mean, y'all been around, you know that. It's not good. It's not even good when they're older, is it? Even if they deserve it. I mean, it's just not. And so you have to navigate that. So Joseph gets set up not only by himself, but he also gets set up kind of by his dad. And then lastly, I don't know exactly how to do this because at this point, we don't know Joseph's spiritual condition. He hasn't mentioned God yet. We don't know. I mean, sure, he has a history of connection with God through Abraham. Obviously, in Genesis 12, he got the covenant to go to the land I'm going to show you, and he does. He makes his descendants. He trusts God and has, the child of promise, and then almost kills him. So there's a history of a relationship with God, but we don't know what Joseph's relationship is. He hasn't said anything about God yet. He didn't say anything about God when he talked about these dreams. But anyway, he has these two dreams. And again, I love, because you just want to know that it's not just about the words you say, it's how you say them. So did he come up to his brother and go, hey, guess what, guys? I'm going to, and then tell a dream. I mean, that's a way different deal than if he goes, man, I had this dream that was really weird. What do you think about it? That's a whole different way of saying it. And it probably would have gone over differently. Although I have a feeling it was closer to the first one than the second one. Because at this point in his life, I think Joseph, he's 17 years old. How many of you are glad that people, sometimes people think, man, it's so great we have all these videos and all this stuff. I'm really glad I didn't get videoed when I was 17. Anybody else there? I mean, I am thankful for that. Now, God knows what I did at 17, so we don't have to deal with that. But as far as you all, you don't know what I did with 17. And I'm thankful for that. Not that I did horrible things, but, I mean, nobody wants to be held accountable for the things they did at 17 because they probably weren't their brightest moments, right? I know it wasn't mine. And so the fact that he did this isn't really horrible. It just shows where he is. And that's what I really want to do. I want you to see where Joseph starts. I mean, so oftentimes, again, we just jump to the end and think, oh, Joseph, woohoo. Yeah, but he didn't start there. He started as a boy that seems to be fairly full of himself. He starts with someone that hasn't given God any acknowledgement yet. He starts with someone that, just to be honest, isn't very wise. I mean, it's one thing to tell the first dream, but then you tell the second one too. I mean, so we had this setup of Joseph just kind of himself setting himself up with tattling. His dad sets him up, and then the dreams, either through his gift or maybe God even a little bit, set him up to get him ready for the journey that he has for him. Because Joseph has a crucial role in what God wants to do, not just in his life, but in all of history. And so he has to get him ready for that. And so that's what he's doing. And so the dreams, as you know, one was, as we read, but I love that end verse that says, but Dad kind of kept this in the back of his mind. Sure, he was kind of frustrated. But he's like, what? I can kind of think, it's like when your kid tells you something, you're like, oh, man. But then you go, okay, what's happening here? Because something's happening. I think Jacob knew there was something going on. So then we begin the journey. So let's read about that. It's the next part of chapter 37, starting with verse 12, sorry. His brothers had gone to pasture their father's flock at Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, your brothers, you know, are pasturing the flocks in Shechem. Get ready, I'm sending you to them. I'm ready, Joseph replied. Now again, were they really that clueless of the relationship between the brothers and Joseph? Was this really that great an idea? Now, maybe not, I don't know. Again, we don't know the details, but it's pretty obvious. I don't know how their house was set up, but I can tell in my house when there's one of the siblings mad at the other, I can kind of tell that, you know? I can kind of feel that, you know? And so it's just kind of interesting. So then Israel said to him, go and see how your brothers are and the flocks are doing, and bring back word back to me. And so he sent him to the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. A man found him there, wandering the field, and asked him, what are you looking for? Sorry. I'm looking for my brothers, Joseph said. Can you tell me where they are pasturing their flocks? Well, they've moved on from here, the man said. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph set out after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And here's where it starts. They saw him in the distance, and before he had reached them, they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, here comes that dreamer. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Now when Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. He said, let's not take his life. Reuben also said to them, don't shed blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him, intending to rescue him from their hands and return him to his father. And when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the robe of many colors that he had on. Then he took him and threw him into the pit, and the pit was empty and there was no water in it. Then they sat down and had a meal. I don't know about you, but anyway, they looked up, and there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and their camels were carrying aromatic gum and balsam and resin going down to Egypt. And then Judah said to his brothers, what do we have to do if we kill a brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And they agreed. And when the Midianite traders passed by, the brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph to Egypt. And when Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes and he went back to his brothers and said, the boy is gone. What am I going to do? And so they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a young goat, and dipped the robe in its blood. And they sent the robe of many colors to their father and said, we found this, examine it. Is it your son's robe or not? Not my brother, is it your son's? And his father recognized it. It is my son's robe. He said, a vicious animal has devoured him. Joseph has been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, I will go down to Sheol to my son, mourning. And his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, and the captain of the guard. So here we see the story beginning. And it's, again, you probably are very familiar with this. He's coming from a long way. And they see him coming, so they plot to kill him. And then Reuben, who's the oldest, because there is something about blood on the hands of family members. And so they had this basic belief we shouldn't do that, you know. I think it came back from Cain and Abel early on when they slayed family members. It was just bad. They just had this, and so they said, let's try to save that. And so even Judah, as he's talking about it, says the same thing. And so they get Joseph, and but again, you see that, I mean, I don't know how many coats you have back then, but he wore the coat, right? I mean, that again just shows that in some ways I just feel like Joseph is just so clueless to what's happening to him. I mean, he seems to make no attempt at all to understand where his brothers are coming from or anything. But again, he's 17, right? And so how clued in are 17-year-olds? I mean, I've got one. They aren't, okay? And so I get it. But still, as I read it, I'm just like, come on, dude. Can't you at least have some kind of interpersonal relationship skills here to understand what's going on? But doesn't seem to happen. And so they get in, and we read the story, and so they go through this whole deal about, killing him and not killing him and all these kinds of things. But again, as I said when I read it, so they throw him in the pit finally, and they think that's going to be it. And then it's just like, then they sit down and eat a meal. And I don't know about you, but I mean, I can imagine, again, trying to get into the story. I can imagine sitting down around this little fire, the pit's over there a little bit, and they hear Joseph going, hey guys, I was just teasing about the dreams, okay? I mean, because a meal to me, yeah, it's food and sustenance, but there's something else about it, It's just they're so casual about what's happened. And so I think it's just an indicator of how much disdain they had toward Joseph. Even the ones that kind of tried to save him, they still had disdain for him. It wasn't like it. Now, Reuben is the oldest, but was planning on trying to get him back to the dad, but the others are just like, nah. And so you need to hear that part of it. And were they right in that disdain? No, they were right. But as you can see earlier on, there's reasons for it. And if you think about the relationships you have and the relationship, there's reasons why relationships end up where they are. I heard somebody say once, it's talking about there's always fault on both sides of a relationship, conflict. The picture he used was, it's a pretty thin pancake that only has one side. And I thought, that's an interesting, it's an interesting image. Because there's always another side. Joseph wasn't wrong all the time. But neither was his brothers wrong all the time. There's stuff happening here. And so I think as we deal with our relationships, I think the more we can kind of realize, maybe it's 95-5, I don't know. But there's always a little bit that I have to own. And that took me a while. I don't know about you, but it took me a while to get there. Because there was times I had relationships where I didn't want to think any of it was my fault. And the truth of the matter is, that's just not true. I had part of it. And that's what we're seeing here is we're seeing God moving through this and beginning this journey for Joseph of him realizing and becoming that person that God could then use. He starts with a relationship. And I think that's a really good place to start. Because it's within our relationships that things really begin to happen in our hearts. I know for me, I've learned more from those than anything else. Yeah, tough times are hard and all that stuff, but it's how the relationships work out of those tough times. And so I'd encourage you maybe today to really think about your relationships. Maybe you have one that isn't where you want it to be, just to be blunt. The person's said something, done something, and you might be totally right in being frustrated or angry or hurt. But I still would encourage you to think in terms of, what's my part in this? Do I have any part in this? And ask God to really open your heart for that. Because I think whether Joseph is doing it yet, he begins to do that. Because we begin to see a change in Joseph as we move forward. Right now, what we know about Joseph is he's a pretty full of himself young man that his brothers despise And they've taken some actions against him. Now, I'm sure when they did this, that first of all, they were going to kill him, obviously, then throw him in a pit and leave him, which was basically killing him too, just not directly. And then finally they went to something that they thought was probably the same thing, but it actually worked out that it wasn't at all. But for them, it was probably the same thing. When they sold them into slavery, do you think they'd ever see him again? Nah, they thought he was gone. They thought he was dead. I mean, what's the chances of him surviving? But as we know, God had a plan. And so we see this idea that there was a setup. And so God is getting Joseph, beginning the journey of Joseph to really look inside himself. And I think that's what relationships do. They force you, if you allow it, they force you to look inside yourself. And I think we're going to see that in Joseph's life. Because at the end of this story, it says he got sold into Potiphar. And then again, some of you already know some of the story of what happens. But next week, we'll be talking about how God continues to mold him. And what I wanted you to keep in mind is what's going on in Joseph. Because that's the key. That's what we're looking at. Because I believe by looking at Joseph's life, we can look then into our own lives and say, God, how do you want to prepare me for what you want me to do? Because the reason there's unfulfilled dreams in the cemetery is because for whatever reason, people didn't put themselves in position to do what they thought they should do. And I just want us to be in position the best we can to be able to do exactly what God wants us to do. And we may be like Joseph. We may have no idea how it fits in. And it doesn't matter. It's just, are we being faithful to what God has called us to do? Are we being faithful to when the Spirit, which we studied, obviously, speaks into our soul to actually do that? And just trusting that God is going to take our little thing and do whatever he wants with it. Whatever piece of the puzzle it fills, that's fine. But we just want to do our part. Well, I do anyway, and I hope you do. I believe you do. I really do. As I've talked to you, I believe you want to do your part. And sometimes you can look and say, that part must not be very big. I don't know what it is. But I know this. You'll miss out on the blessing if you don't do your part. God will accomplish it. God would have accomplished what he needed to do if Joseph hadn't done any of this. If Joseph doesn't respond the way he does, if Joseph doesn't become who he needs to be. God will still accomplish it. But Joseph would have missed out on the blessing. And that's the same thing with you and me. God is going to accomplish what God's going to accomplish. It's whether you're going to be blessed through it or not. That's the only question. And when you engage and begin to do and what God has called you to do and be in that position to do exactly what he wants you to do, then you receive the blessing of the Lord. And there's nothing better than that. I'm telling you, it's so exciting. It's like last weekend. It was hard. It was hard. We drove out there like 12 hours, took a little nap, drove the rest of the way. I was tired. But man, just to hear some of the students say things, and I don't know what happened. I may never see those students again. But I sensed that God wanted us to go out there. And one of the things that Mark did, who's the director out there, he actually talked to my wife, which was really funny because I can't get her to ever talk in front of people, but he just called her up, boom. And so he did an interview with her. And talked about the challenges that we've faced as raising these kiddos. And but the really cool thing was, because I'd made a comment of, if I'd have known how hard it was going to be, I don't know if we would have done it. And he asked because she felt the same way. And she goes, sometimes. But what was so cool is her being able to share that it's not about what we want or what we like. It's about doing what God has called you to do, even when it's really hard. And don't get anything else from that. That'd be good enough. Because we need people that understand that don't run it the first time it gets a little tough. And I believe they heard that message very clear. And it wasn't through me. And that's cool too. And so I don't know what happened. I don't know. But I just know and I'm very confident that God is going to use some of the things we said last weekend to change the trajectory of people. That they'll be a little different because we were out there. Because we tried to be faithful in that moment, not knowing what might happen. And that's what God's calling you to do. When you get up every day, you don't know. But you're going to do that. That's how we start. That's what Joseph does. And so let's learn from him over the next couple of weeks. Let's pray. Father God in heaven, thank you so much for today and just a chance to share about Joseph. And what an amazing story and just a life. God, help us to see ourselves in some ways in Joseph. Because it's a story of transformation. It's a story of transformation from a kind of a full of yourself kind of individual to someone that can be used by you to do amazing things. And I believe with all my heart that's what everyone here wants. And so God, I pray that we might be willing to do that in whatever capacity you call us to. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
To 634, 634, Lord, I'm coming home. I've wandered far away from God. Now I'm coming home. The path of sin I've tried. Lord, I'm coming home. Coming home. Coming home. Never more to roam. Open wide thine arms of love. Lord, I'm coming home. I've wasted many precious years. Now I'm coming home. I now repent with bitter tears. Lord, I'm coming home. Coming home. Coming home. Never more to roam. Open wide thine arms of love. Lord, I'm coming home. Would y'all please be seated? Have a video, Darren? Okay.